Hello and welcome to my presentation on the dry prairie, scrub, and hardwood hammock ecosystems of Florida. You can see photos of each ecosystem from left to right above. So first, I'm going to start with the dry prairie herbaceous species. First, we have the savanna primrose willow, scientific name Ludwigia virgata, and the savanna primrose willow is a host for the fungi Puccinia pulverulenta. Next is rose rush, scientific name Lygodesmia aphylla. Rose rush is a day bloomer, meaning that it only blooms when there is sunlight out. Next is Atlantic St. John's wort, scientific name Hypericum tinifolium. Atlantic St. John's wort is known to attract yellow-faced bees, bumblebees, sweat bees, and gray hair-streak butterflies. Next we have the shortleaf flower, scientific name Sebacia brevifolia. This flower was used in colonial times to treat malaria. However, it is not used anymore. This flower is called yellow milkwort, scientific name Polygala rugelli. Yellow milkwort seeds have elaiosomes, which are deposits full of fat and protein, which attracts ants. The ants take these seeds, get the nutrients, and disperse them. Next is blackroot, scientific name Pterocolum pycnostachium. Blackroot has roots that are tubers, which store nutrients and water, and also produces a chemical called coumarin, which is used in perfumes, fabric softeners, and rat poison. The last herbaceous species of the dry prairie is elephant's foot, scientific name Elephantopus elatus. This flower may have cytotoxic properties due to the chemicals in it called elephantin and elephantopen. However, this is still being researched. Now I will move on to the scrub herbaceous species. The first species is the British soldier lichen, scientific name Cladonia cristatella. The British soldier lichen is important because it acts as a nitrogen fixer for the ecosystem. Next is scrub blazing star, scientific name Liatris oholingerae. Scrub blazing star is a plant that is endemic to Florida and was listed as endangered in 1989 due to severe habitat loss. Now I will move on to the hardwood hammock herbaceous species. The first species is Caesarweed, scientific name Eurena lobata. Caesarweed is an invasive plant in the hardwood hammock ecosystem and is native to Brazil and South Africa. This plant is especially invasive because it grows very quickly. Here we have greenbrier of the Smilax genus. Unfortunately, I could not get it down to species because Smilax is an extremely diverse genus in Florida. Smilax is a dioecious plant, meaning that it has a male plant and a female plant, and the female plant produces berries that are used by the Florida fish crow. Now I will be moving away from the herbaceous species and into the shrubs of each ecosystem. So I'm going to start with the shrubs of the dry prairie. The first shrub is wiregrass, scientific name Aristida stricta. Wiregrass is important for the ecosystem because it is used to spread fire throughout the ecosystem. Next is gopher apple, scientific name Licania mishoxi. And unsurprisingly, gopher apple is an excellent food source for gopher tortoises in these ecosystems. And also unsurprisingly, the ranges of gopher apple and gopher tortoise almost completely overlap. Next is dwarf live oak, scientific name Quercus minima. Dwarf live oak is interesting because it spreads via rhizomes. Finally, we have saw palmetto, scientific name Serenoa repens. An interesting conservation fact about saw palmetto is that the seeds are allegedly used for a cure to prostate cancer, so oftentimes these seeds are over-harvested. Next, we will move on to scrub shrubs. That's a hard one to say. First, we have scrub holly, scientific name Ilex opaca. Scrub holly, like smilax, is also dioecious and has a male plant and a female plant. And again, only the female plant produces berries. Next is the prickly pear cactus, scientific name Opuntia humifusa. Prickly pear is interesting because although it is native to Florida, it is invasive in Asia and South Africa, where they were introduced by early explorers. Another interesting fact about prickly pear cacti is that they can be used as vegan leather. Next is rusty Lionia, scientific name Lionia ferruginea. An interesting fact is this growth that looks somewhat like a flower is actually a fungus that this plant hosts. Next is Florida rosemary, scientific name Ceratiola ericoides. Florida rosemary is interesting because it has allelopathic properties, meaning that it releases a chemical to kill many of its competitors surrounding it. Here we have Chapman's oak, scientific name Quercus chapmani. This oak is characterized by its irregular leaf shape, and its acorns are an excellent food source for Florida scrub jays. Next is scrub palmetto, scientific name Sable atonia. This palmetto is very similar in appearance to cabbage palmetto, however scrub palmetto is only grown in scrub ecosystems. And according to the sign at the Lionia Preserve, there is only scrub palmetto in their preserve and no cabbage palmetto. Next is saw palmetto, scientific name Serenoa repens, and you can tell the difference between the scrub palmetto and the saw palmetto based on the leaf base. This saw palmetto is essential to the ecosystem because it is a host plant for the palmetto skipper and monk butterflies. Finally, we have the scrub bay or silk bay, scientific name Persea humilis. The scrub bay is endemic to peninsular Florida, meaning that it can only be found in the peninsula of Florida. Now we are going to move on to the shrubs of the hardwood hammock. And I've decided to group in epiphytes with the shrubs because there actually aren't very many shrubs that I found in this ecosystem. The first shrub is American beautyberry, scientific name Calocarpa americana. This plant is essential for many ecosystems in Florida because the berries are an excellent food source for many of the birds in the area. Next is Spanish moss, scientific name Tillandsia usnioides. Spanish moss is an epiphyte and is a host for chiggers. Next we have the cabbage palm fern, scientific name Phlebodium aureum. This is also an epiphyte, and those orange dots that you see on the bottom of the fern are actually called sori, which, when the wind blows, will release spores into the air. Now we will move on to the canopies of each ecosystem. So to start, we have the dry prairie canopy, which is not very vast. There's just a single longleaf pine, scientific name Pinus palustris. Longleaf pine is known for having these white candles or apical meristems, and that is one very simple way to identify a longleaf pine compared to other pines. Now we will move on to the scrub canopy. One of the dominant species is the sand pine, scientific name Pinus clausa. The sand pine is interesting because its needles smell like citrus, and It is also the nesting site for many songbirds in the ecosystem. Next is the sand live oak, scientific name Quercus geminata. Some arborists would argue that the sand live oak and the live oak are actually the same species of two different varieties, but for the sake of this slideshow, we are going to say that they are two different species. The sand live oak is also a host for the gray hairstreak butterfly. Now we will move on to the hardwood hammock, understory, and canopy. Now this is by far the most diverse canopy that we have seen in the trips we've been on, so this may be a bit of a long section. First we have the pignut hickory, scientific name Caria glabra. The pignut hickory has fruits that are bitter to most animals, however the hogs enjoy this fruit, hence the name pignut. Next is sweet gum, scientific name liquid ambar styrosiflua. Sweet gum has seeds that are eaten by birds, which can be seen on the right. Another interesting fact is that these seeds are actually dispersed by the wind. When I first saw them, I thought that they would be dispersed by attaching onto animals, given the spikes and the barbs. However, it is actually a very lightweight seed that is best dispersed by wind. Next is the eastern red cedar, scientific name Juniperus virginiana. This is a species that is not typically found in the music hardwood hammocks. However, it was found right at the entrance to the hardwood hammock, so it may be a result as a sort of ecotone between two different ecosystems. Here we have a cabbage palmetto, scientific name sable palmetto. This was the only ecosystem that had cabbage palmettos growing in a tree-like fashion. Also, ironically, the cabbage palmetto is the state tree of Florida. However, it's not a tree at all, it's actually a monocot. Next is the slash pine, scientific name Pinus elioti. This is another tree that is not typical in this ecosystem. However, its presence shows that this area was most probably a pine flatwoods that was taken over by hardwoods, most likely due to a lack of fire in the area. Next is the laurel oak, scientific name Quercus laurifolia. It can be hard to distinguish between the laurel oak and the live oak. However, the laurel oak has a smooth bark, meaning the bark does not have deep indentations, while the live oak has a rough bark, meaning it does have deep indentations that are often visible from a distance. In these pictures, you can see the smooth bark of this laurel oak. Now moving on to the live oak, scientific name Quercus virginiana, you can see the deep indentations in this bark even from the distance I was at. The live oak is the dominant canopy species of the hardwood hammock and closes the canopy, which reduces the sunlight, increases the humidity, and lessens the amount of fires prevalent in the ecosystem. Now we're going to wrap up this presentation by looking at the different fauna of each ecosystem. So first we have the dry prairie fauna. Here we have a gopher tortoise burrow, scientific name Gophurus polyphemus. Gopher tortoise burrows are essential for other species in the ecosystem because they act as a shelter for many snakes and rodents during fires. Next we have a hole created by a 9-banded armadillo, scientific name Dasypus novempsintus. The 9-banded armadillo is the only armadillo found in Florida, and interestingly, its range has been expanding northward over the past couple of years. Next, we have a skipper. Unfortunately, I could not narrow it down to either genus or species, so the family of skipper butterflies is Hesperidae. Skippers are interesting because they do feed on the nectar of flowers, however, they can also feed on bird droppings and get their nutrients that way. Next, we have the fauna of the scrub. The first species is an eastern towhee, scientific name Papilio erythrophthalmus. If you look really hard right in the center of this picture, you can actually see the bird, which I didn't even realize I had a picture of until I was sorting through my photos. This bird is a victim of nest parasitism by brown-headed cowbirds. So essentially, the cowbirds lay their eggs in the eastern towhee's nest, and then the eastern towhee raises their young. Next is the Florida scrub jay, scientific name Aphelicoma coralucens. This bird is endemic to Florida and has been listed as vulnerable. Unfortunately, the species numbers are continuing to decrease even though there have been conservation efforts made to preserve the species. Finally, we have the green-leaf spider, scientific name Pucedia viridans. This spider could potentially be used for agricultural pest management as they aggressively attack insects, especially the corn earworm. Finally, we have the fauna of the hardwood hammock. First is a white-tailed deer, scientific name Odocoilus virginianus. I couldn't actually tell what type of deer this was based on the track. However, white-tailed deer are the most populous in Florida, so statistically, this is most likely a white-tailed deer. I also found these hunting bullets in this ecosystem, which are probably used to shoot deer or turkey. Next is the Florida cottonmouth, scientific name Agastrodon conanti. This is a venomous snake that is known to eat amphibians, lizards, snakes, small turtles, baby alligators, birds, and fish. And lastly, we have the gopher tortoise again, scientific name Gophurus polyphemus, and the gopher tortoise is designated as a threatened species in Florida, so whenever you see a burrow like this, it is important to try to avoid stepping on top of it or disrupting it in any way.